Met Rudy in 1954 in this room. I was giving a party that night, and a friend of mine whom I had invited phoned and asked me if he could bring a friend, and I said I would be delighted, and the friend was Rudy Gernrich. And so Rudy came and took part in the party and so on, and then he was leaving, and I walked out to the car with him and with his friend, and I said to him as he was ready to go, I said, why don't you come and have dinner with me, like for example tomorrow night? And he said fine, and he did, and he was the man who came to dinner. He never left, and there was no difficulty about his family's accepting our relationship. They were very glad to accept it, and accepted it very, very well. But the public acceptance was very different. But Rudy, as early as 1952, was involved, along with Harry Hay, in the early founding of the Mattachine Society. And I have here a little book that I treasure. He was secretary, and in this I have the notes for 1952 and part of 1953 of the activities of the first Mattachine Society. I see here that, for example, in March of 1952, they were to have in 2 weeks a discussion as to how to present the homosexual culture to heterosexual society. And I read also that the moderator was to be Steve. I'd very much like to meet Steve today and talk with him. Of course, I haven't the faintest idea of who he was. And so he was, even while he was already emerging as a force in the fashion industry and so on, was working with the Mattachine Society. I would say that his attitude was exactly the same as mine. Never accept actual limitations on your freedom, but remain within discretion. And so that was a fine line, and that was a fine line that you had to tread. Rudy and I were extremely well matched. We were a very well matched couple, because while we were doing very different things, we also had a fundamental understanding with each other, which was very strong and very intimate, and which was never called into question, regardless of the ups and downs of any relationship. The basis of the relationship, the fundamental binding of the relationship, was never called into question. And people often asked us exactly the question that you, not so much what's particularly do you remember, but they would ask us, how have you been able to stay together so long? 31 years, how do you make it? Our heterosexual friends all sort of felt on the defensive and ashamed. They'd all had 3, 4, 5 divorces, and we went on and on. I remember one very late conversation one night with a heterosexual couple with whom we were very, very close friends, and one of them said, well, how have you two guys managed to keep going like this, you know? We're into our 3rd and 4th husband or wife, and so then I started off with some philosophical statement meandering along that didn't seem to come to any particular point, and suddenly Rudy said, well, it's very simple. And everybody listened, and he said, Arrest and I have very different temperaments. We are very different, but we have the same value system. And he said, I think that is why. And I think he was right. I am not a fashion person, and so I do not have too much fashion knowledge. You could talk with people who are far more competent in Rudy's fashion than I could hope to be, because they know the field of fashion. I was not in that field, and I did not live with a fashion designer. I lived with a man named Rudy Gernrich, and that was something very different. Rudy was a very ethical person, and he was very conscious. He's been called a philosopher as well as a designer, a sociologist, a social thinker, all of that. He was very concerned with the relationship of clothes to human reality. What did it mean to dress? What did it mean to make yourself into an image? An image, we know, is not a reality. It's a quasi-reality. It's an irreality. It is something that is in the imagination. Now, what is it we want to show when we put ourselves into the imagination? And that's, of course, where the excitement of the person comes into play. Quickly, it came in 1984. Suddenly, we were celebrating the holidays in Palm Springs, and he had a kind of an attack. And after 1 month, as a matter of fact, on the 24th of January, he'd had his first attack on the 24th of December, they diagnosed it as lung cancer, terminal. And from that point on, it was 3 rapid months to his death. He knew, of course, what the diagnosis was, because neither one of us wanted to play games about a thing like that and pretend, and it just wouldn't have been possible. Rudy couldn't have pretended. And so he said, I just want it to be fast. And it was. And that is something that is a comfort to me in this area in which there is no comfort.